Hey YouTube, we're back, part 3 of the Airbus A380 flaps mod. Where we last left off on part 2, we had just got this flap separated from the wing. So you haven't had a chance to really play with the strength at all, figure out if we're going to have any issues there. And I was hoping to do some tests here with some masking tape. The stuff's pretty sticky. It might be a little bit too sticky for the test, but we'll see. What I want to do is I want to just cut a couple of strips and just kind of see how the geometry is lining up. To simulate the way the hinges are going to work. Because you really gotta, this is where it's gonna get a little tricky, because we're gonna start running into stuff like we are over there, and then you'll start having gapping in places where you didn't expect it to have gaps. And this is how we can get the geometry to work out. Like we talked about, this would normally be a seam here, and then there would be another seam here between this and this. So between this and this you'd have a seam. I don't think we're going to need a seam there, but we might need something here to make it work right. And then the other thing is, I don't know if I want it to separate down there. See how it's tucking down under itself. The other thing is, you don't want these to go down far enough to where they're under the landing gear. That would be, of course, not good. So I'm wondering if the easiest way would be to separate this here and make it move kind of on its own panel, and then just have one linkage that goes straight ahead and then one linkage that goes over. And so it pulls both of them together. I mean, that's not horrible. That action is not horrible there. But it's going to create some weird things with the shape. Because it's going to catch the air and push it out funny. So we'll just have to play with this a little bit to see if we can get it to kind of move the way we want. So if I were to cut this, I could cut it in such a way that it comes to a point, but it's going to have to be coming to a point down here so that I can get closer like this as it opens. So that means you're going to have an opening on the top, which I don't know if I want to see that opening. So as this actuates, this would stay put. And the only other way to do that is to cut a wedge like this. But I guess I'm not 100% certain that this won't work. I think it would be better if it was cut, though. I really didn't want to cut this, but I think it might be the best option. No guts, no glory, right? So I'm going to cut it about halfway down and just see if I can... Maybe what I can do is just cut it and then allow it to hinge from the top. Yeah. I think that's what we're going to have to do. Okay, so it's cut through now. So now we have two separate panels, or we will in about 3 seconds here, when I make that last little bit of cut. Yep. And this last little bit of cut. Alright, so now we're separate. And I was hoping we wouldn't have to do that, but I can't say I'm super surprised. Okay, so now the next piece we're going to need to do is figure out how we can get these both to actuate without rubbing into each other. But as you can see now, we can go ahead and kind of figure out our geometry. So we're basically gonna have this pivot right there. Okay, so let's just pull this one out all together for now, so it's out of the way. As you can see, we're going to have this action here, or something similar to that. That's going to look pretty cool. So I think we're going to want this to have a little bit of play, but I'm not sure how I want to do that yet. See, because I can take these hinges, I could stick this in so that as it actuates, it comes out and away, so that this gap stays even. I think that's what we're going to have to do on there. And this is where it starts getting complicated on what should be a relatively simple flap. See, we're rubbing inside there too right now. Okay, so that's another point we're going to have to worry about to get corrected. So now we get this thing parked in its home position. Tape it tight. Okay, so we got everything together. And as we actuate the flap now, see, we're binding right in the middle there. It's like this would actuate down, and then this gets bound up really bad as it goes. So the part that's going to need to be trimmed out is on the top portion. So if we flip this wing over, so as that actuates, we're going to have to remove material here. So those spoilers are going to be very critical in terms of covering up this ugliness. But I want to try to maintain this portion down here being untouched, or we're going to have a heck of a time covering that up. So that's what we're going to concentrate our efforts now on that portion there. So if we need to try to trim some material away, we should be okay to do it, but we want to stop about here. So I'm going to take a little bit of this tape just as a reminder, so we know approximately where that's going to be. It's the don't cut anything below there point, and that's not meant to hold those together, that's just meant to mark our position. Okay, so now we could cut down here on the bottom portion to make that relief cut, but it's like it's touching on the top more than it is on the bottom. I think the bottom is going to be okay largely. So I'm just going to take this and just cut it a little teeny bit and just taper it down, and we'll see if that's enough. We don't want to cut any more than we have to here. Ooh, that's really close already. Wow, I got pretty lucky on that cut. So, I mean, and like I said, if we actuate here at that angle, we may be okay. So now if we were to hinge at all these spots, I guarantee we're going to have some issues. So let's just test that. That's where we're going to end up with our third panel. Remember, I want one servo to drive this whole thing. I don't want to have 3 servos, let alone 2. Obviously this is not the way I'm hinging, or I'm not planning on hinging it this way. I suppose if one was motivated you could do that. So there's actually his cut here, the real one is. So now you see this gap here. We could change the way that that works. But we're going to, of course, have to figure out where we need to give up material. And where's the most critical part to give up material? Well, probably on the bottom because it'll be seen. On the top it's going to be hidden. So you can imagine this is going to kind of hit stuff, but I want it to pull it out in a way like that. Okay, so it's going to be on the top. Same thing, the spoilers are going to help to obscure some of this. Okay, and I keep these for reference points, for size reference, when I go to do the other side. Because by the time I get to the other side doing this, it's going to be tricky to remember all the details. Oh, that's way more smooth. That's way more smooth. But like I said, the action's going to be a little bit different than that. It's still going to pivot here the same way. You see how we got that gap is about, it's coming out and evening out as it goes. So then this becomes a hinge point. Okay, so that's our next test point. So now we need to put this down here. Okay, now watch this. Okay, so if we were going to make those work better, we would need to have it sandwich like this and then collapse as it gets up to a full deployment stage. So we need to take material out of the top. Or we would just need to move the whole thing over. I don't think we can do that. Not without making it look stupid. Okay, so we're going to have a little gap here. And that's just the way it's going to be. Okay, the smallest amount of material removed as we can. You can put it back, but it's hard. Or I should say you can put it back to a degree. See, I like the way that looks, but it's not quite enough. I didn't exaggerate that enough. See how it's pulling away there? That's what I want. I want it to stay out like that. And I don't think we're going to connect here. I think we're just probably going to cheat it here. Unless I can just open this up and have it hinge from the top. See how it wants to snap back? I have no doubt that this can handle that little bit of torsion load. The problem is these are not actual hinges. Those are just a piece of tape. So the behavior is going to be a whole lot more flexible. So if we were to cut this here, that would give us our flexibility. Of course, we'll be reattaching it probably with a piece of tape, and there'll be a seam up top. The real one has it, so why would we not? This could be a big mistake. Okay, here we go. Just even having that freedom there to move out and down makes a big difference. It looks more real too. That's cool. That's really cool. It's a lot less load when I do this now. And these are allowed to stay tight now, which is good. You see that? How it just has that little bit of a propensity to want to separate now. So that means we'll need to hinge this somehow to keep them together. So we'll probably put one of these hinges, or one of the micro hinges, so it'll be something like this, and we'll actually stick it in there like that. And so what that does is it keeps them oriented so that when this articulates, this comes up, and it has nothing else to do but to be able to keep this kind of in that straight angle there. Okay? That's a cool flap. I like that. Looks more realistic this way too. I think that's what we're doing. Okay, so now let's talk about what we can do to create this back gap. This back gap is going to be one of the more challenging points. I'm actually toying with the idea of just leaving a gap, intentionally leaving a gap there. Maybe it would be easier to just leave it. I'm not sure. Maybe I could support this in two spots. I could support it here so it pivots, and then I could support it here with our V-shaped hinge. And then there's actually no support on the inside. The problem is you're going to have a lot of pressure from the air pressure, and then of course the EDF is going to be blowing at that too. Same thing here. It's going to want to push this back. That's going to be plenty strong. Definitely a micro hinge here. Might be the middle size here. So it'll be like a micro on the end. And there'll be like this mini size here. And then I don't even know if I'm going to use these. I almost never use these big ones because they would seem to be a little bit too big, a little too hard to get installed, because you end up just losing so much material. But that would sure help with strength of the wing. See, and the thing that's tough about this is that that action is not square. It's kind of like this. So you have to be very mindful how you install those. Because those are not just going to be like this. It's going to be like this. Okay? Because you have to notice what direction the knuckle would be if it was a finger, right? And you can always trim these down, which I may end up doing. So that's something I'll just have to study and make sure that that's going to work. I'm really halfway tempted to just use a piece of tape on the front of the surface and maybe not ever finish that cut all the way through, because that would take care of our hinge job there. And then this one, we just put one piece of tape on the back as well. This one has one piece of tape on the front. That would satisfy our requirements there. And then this big piece, maybe we will use these big ones. Alright guys, so you can see it's a little tedious, it's challenging to get all these details worked out. But as you can see, from pretty much any point I can actuate the whole flap without any binding, and it's very limited amount of load. So that means our servo is not going to be challenged to try to pull a huge, gigantic mechanical load statically. You know, I mean, dynamically this thing's going to be a lot more load, because look how big this surface is. It's as big as some small wings. So you got one Metal Gear servo pulling this whole thing. It could, ideally you want it to be all the way to this side of the action. Okay, you want it to be all the way back when it's stopped, so it's pointed that direction. You want it all the way forward when it's full deployment. That way you can kind of have everything locked in, so you're just pulling up against the actual mount inside the wing and not so much on the gear teeth. So not that these gear teeth will fail, but the motor might. So, alright, cool. So now that's done. I am going to go through the process of kind of duplicating these cuts on the other side. We still have this roughly attached on the canoes. And then I'm going to get these all to agree and we'll come back, because one thing you'll learn as you do these flap mods and things like this is you want to try to keep as much symmetry as possible. It's very easy to forget exactly what you did on each of these steps, even if you have a video. So we're going to pause it. We'll come right back, pick it up where we left off. Alright guys, so I got both of them cut and taped the same way. And then I took and started shaping this one, so I'll show you how I get to that stage on this one here. Basically, you can see that I've created what appears to be a wing, so that when these flaps get deployed, remember, there's going to be a spoiler that goes over the top of this. Even if it's not active, there will be a piece that's here, okay? That's going to happen. It's not even a question, because we've already destroyed the look of the top. So at minimum, we'll do something similar to like what we did here on the A320. And this was super duper easy. And it worked really nice. It looks really nice, I think. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see that very good with these lights right here. But they worked. They weren't functioning other than what the aileron moved up. So as you can see, the action's nice and smooth. I mean, gravity just drops them down, and then this gap just opens up a little wider. So I'm not even sure if I'm going to do anything other than maybe some reinforcement tape right along this area. So in case that foam would break, we don't want this to break free in flight. That would be detrimental to flight performance. But now what we need to do is we need to duplicate that shaping onto this side. Even though that means that we're going to have a less tight closure here. That's fine. That's all part of it. So most of it I did with the X-Acto knife, but then I used this 3M sanding block. I can't remember what grit that was. Oh, it looks like 150. It's the medium. This stuff is really good. I like it. It's like a squishy foam block. So it works nice. Okay, so basically what I'm doing is I'm going for the airfoil shape, but I'm also going in here and just kind of cleaning things up as I see problems. And so, like for instance, I just want to mimic the shape over here, right? So that they have the same airfoil. But I also can straighten up some of my indiscretions from previous cuts. Okay? And you just take thin little slivers at a time. Remember, when the flaps are at maximum deflection, it's going to be like probably like that. So you want these wings, also known as flaps here, when you're in a high alpha configuration, like taking off or coming into land, they're going to help to prevent separation of the airflow over the top of the airfoil, on the main airfoil. And they become like almost a second little wing. They also add drag, in this case, significant amount of drag. So I just basically get the knife in to create that shape, and then I'm just working my way up and down until I get the shape approximately the way I want. We don't want to remove so much of the wing that there's just nothing there, so that might have been just a little bit more than we needed to do. But we want to get it done sometime in this century too, so now this transition here might cut our connection point off, so we got to be careful about that too. Okay, even if it did, it's not a big deal. But you can see we're kind of creating that pseudo airfoil shape, because as this deploys, it creates a gap between here and here, which is going to allow the air from the bottom of the wing to come over as well. So that separation, I can show you an example here in just a second, but that separation we know as a stall is what we're trying to avoid. So we basically just have another small wing. So if there were a separation, the separation just goes straight into the wing. Or excuse me, it doesn't. You stop that from happening by speeding up the air, but this is kind of a gut-wrenching thing too, because, you know, if you don't get it right, then it is a little bit hard to add that back, but and you can see kind of how we've got this one here. Got a nice smooth transition there. Now if you could cut this right out of the gate when you were separating these, that would be awesome, but I just don't. I've tried doing stuff like that before, it just never works. You always end up coming back through and doing this, at least on a foam wing for sure. If this was a balsa wood plane or whatever, you'd have to design this all in at the beginning. And then I'm taking just this nasty little corner down here. I trim that out on both sides. Then I'm just taking just a little teeny bit off of this edge here. Again, that's just to kind of get that airfoil shape. And you'll notice that when this is collapsed, we've got a pretty big gap here and a gap here. That's so that there's no tendency to want to get in there and bind up, because that'll cause all sorts of grief for us later if we have binding. And since this wing this little flap wing dips down at a weird angle, I try to make it shape like a wing a little bit further back also. Now obviously at this point we're deviating from the scale plane quite a bit as a means to make this thing fly at super slow speeds. Okay, we're no longer trying to match the exact look of this part of the plane, but when it's all said and done, we'll be able to really kind of sell the look by doing some details here and there, particularly the spoilers. If we do the 8 panels, the spoilers, we'll be able to make it look really good in scale, and there'll be no mistaking what we're looking at. What type of plane it is, we're going to know exactly what it is. And then also just one other thing we were talking about in part 1 about the spoilers. Well, I was thinking about that some while I've been working, and I thought, boy, if I just did spoilers, and like I was saying, I could just have the control rod made up and just overlap here. And so when these go up, then the rod gets moved and then it pivots, you know, maybe out here, because it's just a light plastic. And that would avoid the added layer of complexity of having another servo on this wing, because it's already going to be a fairly complex wing when it's all said and done. We haven't even got the lighting yet. So the lighting is going to be complicated too. Okay, so we're getting pretty close on our rough cuts here. So you've got quite a bit of freedom on, you know, that closure gap is not going to be seen there. So we don't have to worry about making it super pretty. I mean, this part's going to be seen, but we'll just make it so that that covers up. Like I said, a little deviation from scale, and you can see there's just material all over the floor because I've not been real careful with this. So it's definitely a lot of material. And then like these two, on the other side, I ended up taking just a little bit more material out to just really make it so that there's just no resistance there. You want those things to be able to collapse down and keep that nice shape. I think I did the same thing here. I just went along this edge, just took that down just ever so slightly. Okay, so now that we've got that kind of rough shape that we want, we can go ahead and come in here and just work it with a sand block, sanding block. You can also take this along this kind of rugged edge and you can work this rugged edge to get that kind of squareness, that square, clean, finished look to it. And what'll happen is it doesn't take too many passes, and the next thing you know, you'll look up and it's kind of almost clean. All those little cuts and stuff, they get sanded right out, which is nice. I'm not saying it looks perfect like, you know, a molded end, but you'll at least kind of get away some of these, like this little bump here. See, it's diminishing a little bit. Okay, rotate this thing once in a while, and I usually put a vacuum to it if it starts getting clogged up. Okay, so on this one I'm having trouble getting this nasty edge cleaned up, so I'll just take this knife and kind of make a smooth transition into it. That last little bit we'll get with the sanding block. And this stuff is relatively strong. It seems like it's weak until you get into it. So, just noticing we're about to run out of time, so you get the idea. I mean, shaping these things is just more of a personal preference thing. But just look how cool that's going to be, guys. Part 3 is over. Part 4 coming soon. A380 Flaps mod with Brian Phillips here. Come back for more, guys. Check the link in the description below. Lots of little things you can buy to help support our channel. Like this, for instance. The receiver we're using. And all sorts of other cool things. So, thanks for doing that if you can. But for sure, come back. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We appreciate you being a part of this experience.